Um, we were talking about democracy, this concept of democracy, and how this is, many voters are saying the state of democracy is what they're voting on. What does this independent candidacy represent, or how does it reflect the state of American democracy? What kind of suppression are you seeing out there with Green Party candidates and other independent candidates? And what kind of treatment are you getting from the Democratic Party and DNC's sort of outsourced influencers on social media and elsewhere?
Look, the suppression has been incredible. The Green Party has to spend millions of dollars that it doesn't really have to try to defeat legal attacks from the Democratic Party to kick it off the ballot. It is experiencing mismanagement and interference from state Democratic parties, like as we're seeing in Ohio, where they've played these shenanigans with deadlines on when you can announce your VP, making separate rules for the Green Party than they've instituted for the Democratic Party, which also didn't choose its presidential candidate, much less vice presidential candidate, till after the deadline date. But the Green Party has been kicked off the ballot, and at various precincts, folks have reported signs saying that your Jill Stein Green Party vote won't count, which the Green Party is contesting in court. Moreover, we have seen attempts to interfere with independent journalists, specifically independent Black journalists. 2 radio hosts were fired earlier this year after it came out that the Democratic Party fed them questions. And Tavis Smiley, a renowned radio host, recently sat down with me for an interview on Bad Faith Podcast and went into detail about how he received Oppo research from a senior person in the Democratic Party, including questions that they were sent to him before he sat down with Jill Stein just a couple of weeks ago. He immediately told Jill Stein and on camera read the questions and exposed that this was going on. The other 2 radio hosts went along with the program, and when their station found out about it, it was a violation of their codes of conduct, and they got fired for journalistic malpractice. So there's really no ends too far for the Democratic Party to go to try to make sure that we don't live in a democracy, that they have full control over who voters even know is running for this race. I mean, as a very secondary matter, I have come under a lot of focus, I think in part because, look, there's always shaming when you move outside of the Democratic Party, but I think it's relatively rare for people, not that I'm of any real renown, but the backlash is so strong that I think most people would rather avoid it. We saw what happened to people like Susan Sarandon, who's been, by all accounts, blacklisted from many quarters in Hollywood. People have been dropped by their agents for advocating for Palestine. It's a real dog-eat-dog world out there. And if you've gone through it once, a lot of people just don't really.
She was dropped by creative artists. She was dropped by Creative Artists Agency.
That's right. That's right. So my feeling is that, as frustrating as it is sometimes, as difficult as it is sometimes, and as much as, frankly, for my own kind of professional kind of shielding and professional kind of neutrality, I would prefer not to maybe take on this role. I do feel like it's a sort of an obligation, as long as it's out there. Journalists all over the place talk about who they're going to vote for, but for some reason it's supposed to be uniquely stigmatizing if you're voting Green. I think that normalizing that normal people who have earned the trust and respect, at least in some quarters of the internet and some quarters of the left, are very openly making this political choice, is creating a permission structure for others to realize that they don't have to be stuck in the corporate plantation of the Democratic Party. I went out and made my own Green Party hats. I've been walking around in them in the city. I've been trying to really resist the stigma that is around not voting blue no matter who. And I think the reason is simple. I don't just feel like the Democratic Party needs to be punished. I feel like the Democratic Party is absolutely part and parcel of the ratchet effect. Without the Democratic Party, we wouldn't have the consistent moving to the right. And if you genuinely want to stop the rightward shift of this country, I think that you have to at least make an attempt to create an independent political structure that will have the opposite effect of the ratchet effect, to pull the country back to the left instead of voting lesser of two evils in a way that guarantees that the next conservative candidate, the next conservative nominee, is going to be to Donald Trump's right. There's no counterbalance unless we start to fight now today for a political alternative.
But what do you make of the argument? This is the counter argument to this. And there was a recent video that was put out by people who, identify with what they call the left, the radical left organizers, saying that, electoral politics is not about our own preferences, our own values. It's about setting the conditions under which we wish to organize. And we rather organize against our weakest opponent, which in this case is Kamala Harris, versus someone like Trump, who will make it harder to organize and will be impossible to sway because he's on the right and they won't care at all what we say on the left. Whereas we have a chance of moving someone like Kamala Harris. And certainly we have a chance of organizing better under a Kamala Harris than we do under someone like Trump.
That's like the criminal in Hannibal, throwing down a baster and some seasoning to the captive victim in the hole and saying, season yourself up real nice and maybe you'll have a better chance of escape. It's absurd. What kind of organizing have we seen under Joe Biden? Why do we talk about this as though the entire context of the Gaza genocide hasn't happened under a Democratic administration? Did we see pussy hats and people in the streets when Joe Biden was president? We had the largest protest movement in American history in 2020 in the BLM protest. And when Joe Biden became the nominee, everyone was told they had to sublimate their deeply held feelings about a man being killed on camera in front of our eyes to dutifully go and vote for the guy who says we needed to fund the police harder, the man who wrote the crime bill. And police killings unjustified police killings have only gone up under the Biden administration. At a certain point, there has to be an acknowledgement that while some things are in fact worse under Republican presidents, some things get worse under Democratic presidents. I like to say sometimes that it takes a Democrat. It takes a Democrat to neuter the welfare state like Bill Clinton did, to start the war on crime like Bill Clinton did. And there are many people more historically grounded and smarter than I am who have pointed out that there's a good argument that Richard Nixon was a more progressive candidate than many of our contemporary Democratic politicians that we've had during our lifetime. You have Kamala Harris bear hugging the Cheneys, running around trying to castigate Jill Stein in these attack ads while she just received an endorsement from Richard Spencer. The point is that we have two conservative parties here, and I will not be preached to about lesser of two evils when the lesser evil is beyond my wildest dreams of anything that I would ever consider voting for in a negative way, obviously.
Yeah, I was always wondering what happened to Richard Spencer.
Well, he's Team Harris.
Remember, he was like in 2016, he was getting like cover stories on Mother Jones. They're like the handsome former college quarterback who's now the face of Nazism. And then he just dropped off the face of the map. And now he's back. He started out as a kind of centrist Republican who would hang out at AEI and the think tanks, and word on the street is he dated a lot of prominent female neoconservative journalists who will not be named now. Julia Ioffe and David Duke. This whole thing of him endorsing Jill Stein was the most predictable thing ever. He endorsed me when my book Goliath became a threat to the neocons. He actually didn't. It was like a semi-positive review that says I wasn't anti-Semitic enough on his site. And they said but like Christopher Hitchens wrote a piece about how David Duke endorsed Cindy Sheehan because he praised her when she was doing her protest outside Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas. David Duke was jailed for fleecing his followers out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when he came out of prison, he was broke. And then suddenly he starts endorsing all these people who are mainly on the left, who are threats to the establishment. I mean, put two and two together. And what's Richard Spencer doing? It all raises a lot of questions about hijinks here. You also talked about suppression. I heard a Green Party candidate was kicked off the ballot in Ohio after a forged signature was submitted to the Secretary of State stating that they no longer wish to run, and that the Green Party is still lobbying the Secretary of State and trying to prove that was a forgery. The Democrats have tried to force Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to remain on the ballot in states. This is crazy election interference.